Within the last year, a number of us in our industry noted some interesting points as it related to coverage of specific politicians. And sometimes it took bringing it up for those of you who still turn pages, clipping pages and saying, compare, contrast, or a scan or an email, and knowing that the dynamic dialogue was necessary. So here we are, 1 month past our previous date. We want to thank those of you who were going to come out a month ago today when we got God's laughter, white laughter all over us in the form of the snowstorm. And so I want to thank you very much for you and your energy and your enthusiasm in showing up tonight for our honest conversation about race and ethics in Chicago media. And very, very honored to have 6 of the best in the business, not just in Chicago, but in the country, shaping tonight's discussion. So with that being said, we ask you to be comfortable, to open up your mind, because again, this is going to be honest discussion. Consider this your excellent empire for the evening. Those of you get it, no, okay, cool. So let's say that, either you get it or you don't. So with that being said, just a few housekeeping notes. The restrooms are out that door in the back to the left, to my right. And if you have not been given an index card, we're asking individuals to think about the questions that you may want to ask before the question and answer period begins in terms of the audience, because we'll be taking your questions off of the index cards and we will be addressing as many of the questions as possible. And so with that being said, to my immediate right, and thank you again for coming. To my immediate right, Mr. Mark Brown, a senior columnist at the Chicago Sun-Times. Pardon? Did I say that left? I apologize. Again, some Marines don't give directions very well. Next to Mark is Delmarie Cobb, owner of the Publicity Works and groundbreaking journalist here in Chicago. Next to Delmarie, Ms. Hermine Hartman, the owner of Hartman Publishing Company and the founder and creator of Indigo, the largest free weekly in the country that's African American focused. Ms. Esther Cepeda, the owner of EJC Communications and the syndicated columnist with the Washington Post. Mr. Charles Thomas, chief political correspondent for ABC 7 Chicago. And serving as our moderator, and the next voice you will hear is the one who will always be remembered to telling the former mayor where he could stick it. With that being said, Mr. Mick Dumke, senior writer for Chicago Reader and our moderator for this evening.
Well, since we believe in accuracy, Doyle, yes, I may have in private conversation told the mayor where he could stick it, but it was actually the mayor who told me where he would like to stick it, which is up my rear end. I did not start that conversation. All right, thanks to you all for being here. We're going to keep this loose and keep it moving fast. So I know all of you guys are veterans. None of you will be offended, not if, but when I cut you off and try to keep this thing moving. I want to start off by just recollecting for a second that 32 years ago, during a very heated mayoral race, back then, of course, it was a partisan election system, so there were 2 rounds of voting, much as we've lucked into this time around. But back then, there was there were the party primaries and then a general election. And those of you who've been around following this since then, or who have done your research and know your history, will recollect that the Republican nominee for mayor against Harold Washington, who is about to become the first African-American mayor of Chicago, the Republican nominee, Bernie Epton, took up the campaign slogan, "Before it's too late," which most observers astute or otherwise, recognized as a not so subtle racial message about what could happen to Chicago if a black man were elected mayor. Earlier today, according to Fran Spielman of the Sun-Times, Senator Mark Kirk was quoted as saying that if any of those other guys, apparently he didn't understand, he didn't get the memo there already was an election. There's only one other guy besides Rahm running against him. But he said if any of those other guys elected, Chicago could become like Detroit. And the exact quote, again, because we're into accuracy, "We're in a dynamic environment in which Detroit hangs over the future of Chicago's economy." My question to the members of the panel is, how is this different from saying before it's too late? Is it different at all? Charles, you're within arm's reach.
Well, you know, Detroit,
saying that Chicago could become Detroit, is that really any different from saying before it's too late?
That does have racial overtones, because Detroit, it is Detroit. And I think a lot of times when these guys make comparisons to Detroit, Detroit was a city that had African-American leadership for many, many years, since the 1960s. And of course, it had a downward spiral that didn't have anything to do with the African-American leadership. It was more about industry leaving. But I think that is a scare tactic of sorts that's used. What do you think?
Mark, were you raising your hand? Do we have someone who's able to work on mics here?
Now?
There we go.
Sorry, I turned it off instead of turning it on. I just want to point out, that was also the scare tactic used for the Harold Washington election too, was that Chicago will become another Detroit. That is exactly what was said. And, you know, by people who thought it was better to say that than before it's too late, you know, so.
Is Hermine?
Yes, that was done, and yes, those are racist tactics. But here's what people look like to me they don't get. We get it. When people make these little subtle, subdued, subliminal, racist remarks, we understand what they're saying.
Who do you mean by we?
We black folks, we voters, we minorities. We understand what they're saying, and it backfires on them all the time. Chicago City is about a step away from Detroit now. The ratings just went down. They didn't go up after 4 years of genius. They went down. We're down 2%. So we are a step away from Detroit, and it doesn't matter who the mayor is.
And that's what I was going to say, is that if we're really accurate, we are a step away from being Detroit. But it won't be because of Jesus Garcia going into office. It's because of 30 years of leadership that we've had that's neglected the neighborhoods, which is why you had 200,000 African Americans leave the city of Chicago between 2000 and 2010. And the people who left the city of Chicago are the people we want to keep here, the people with resources, the people who decided that they wanted a bigger bang for their buck, they wanted better schools, and they wanted safer streets. And they had the resources to go somewhere else. And so we are a step from Detroit, but not because of the looming election that we're looking at.
Esther, since everyone else has had a take.
I agree with all of those things, and that's the first thing that came to mind, is that who cares about that? You know, we're practically there anyway. I thought it was kind of a weak thing to say, frankly.
All right, so it's a weak thing to say, like it didn't do any good, it didn't help Rahm, or he shouldn't have brought it up, or
He shouldn't have brought it up, it didn't help Rahm. We all knew what he meant. It was like, why you open your mouth on this one? So.
But does it work? I mean, Hermine, you said that we get that, and you said that we as the African-American community gets it, we as voters. I actually don't know if people do get it. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who don't want to be Detroit. I mean, you know, and by the way, poor Detroit, we're always picking on them. That's apparently our standard, but that's a whole other conversation. By the way, their baseball team does way better than either ours does year in and year out. But beautiful ballpark, by the way. Anyway, so it must work. Otherwise, why do people keep saying it? Mark said they said it 32 years ago. So,
but it doesn't work. It didn't work then. Harold Washington won. It doesn't work now. Here's the thing. The gimmicks don't work. The gimmicks don't work. You can bring Barack Obama in here every day. Okay, the hug didn't work. The Pullman naming National Park, it didn't work. Michelle and Barack came in for Quinn. It didn't work.
Maybe they should have brought the girls, too.
Well, maybe the girls would work, but it didn't work. My point is the gimmicks don't work. Chicago is probably the most sophisticated voter in America. We know gimmicks. We know see-through. We know the jokes. We know the plans. You can go, when Harold, to your point, Mark, when Harold Washington was running, I knew he had won the day I had the occasion to be in about 4 cabs. Every cab driver said, Harold, here's who doesn't get it. The white media doesn't get it.
Well, can I say something? I think it does work for Mark Kirk. And here's how it works. There are 2 views of this election that we're having right now in Chicago. There's a suburban view, and then there is a city view. And I think a lot of people in the suburbs are saying that. I had a colleague of mine say the same thing. He said, boy, is this town going to be in trouble if Chuy Garcia is elected? And I kind of looked at him and said, what? This was in the basement at Channel 7. And I said, don't ever say that in public again. But this is a person that lives in the suburbs, and this is the view. But what people in the suburbs don't quite understand, when they come to Chicago, they hang out downtown, and they see a lot of people that look like them. But they never go to the neighborhoods where 70% of this city, remind you, is black and brown. And this was a Caucasian that said this to me in the basement, and this was his view. And I think that when Mark Kirk says stuff like that, there are a lot of people in the suburbs who agree with him. That's our guy, Mark Kirk. I mean, he's on it.
Can I just
jump in?
This is not just a suburban thing. I mean, this is going to be the dominant theme of the campaign from the Emanuel campaign, and it's going to be couched in terms of Detroit, and indeed, because we have these financial problems, because we have these sorts of issues, there's, you know, you can shape an argument to try to run around race, you know, but look at the 42nd, 43rd wards. This is where Rahm had huge margins. That's not a suburban thing, right? That's people that are saying exactly what you're saying. Your guy said, but this is North.
And Rahm himself, I got a mailer, and one of the slogans on one of his many mailers, it was hard to keep track of them all, but said, "Big city, big challenges, big job." Rahm Emanuel. No, he's not saying Detroit. There's no overt racial message there, but it's still kind of like, who do you really trust here? And so I guess my question to you guys is not whether this is, I mean, I think we should keep talking about whether it's an effective campaign strategy, but what is our job as journalists? Are we supposed to talk about the fact there may be some veiled racial code there, or is that going too far? If they don't bring it up, should we not bring it up? Esther?
I think we should talk about it.
The answer is yes, we should talk about it. Yeah. And you should talk about it purely. Let me give you an example. The white media has romanced this man who is ignorant named Willie Wilson, like he is a leader, like he can talk, like he is intelligent. He is ignorant.
He's intelligent.
He is ignorant.
Disagree.
Well, we disagree.
He opens factories in China. I mean, now clearly he has a translator, and they don't understand that he's got a 7th grade education and he's from the South. But
front
They
company?
understand. I mean, maybe he doesn't know how to say it, and because he doesn't have a record, the message is all that he has. But I demand obviously an intelligent businessman, intelligence versus communication skills.
Okay, well let's revisit this question here.
I think we're digressing.
We're transitioning now. There were two African American candidates in this race. How were they covered? I mean, I think for the most part, Doc Walls was dismissed.
Well,
by
no, he
almost
wasn't
everybody.
dismissed. He was in the debates, and I thought it was...
Should he have been dismissed?
No, absolutely not. Should not have been in those debates. The man has run twice before. He only gets 1-2% of the vote when he did run the two other times. He is the quintessential perennial candidate. Why are we giving him equal footing with the mayor of the city of Chicago and these other guys who are running? And he has no money. He has no office. I mean, what's going on? I think he was...
Well, he got the signatures to get on the ballot, so should we have not taken him seriously?
Nobody challenged him because they knew that he wasn't of any consequence.
Okay. Esther, we tried to get you in a minute ago. Willie Wilson, did the media generally, the mainstream, i.e. white media, did it go too easy on him?
I don't think that any of the candidates got that just rigorous, going over, because it felt for most people, and especially on election night, I was hearing, oh, Rahm's going to take this, Rahm's going to take this, regardless of what the numbers said in the morning. I think that we had these debates, but when people are allowed to debate in talking points, there's not much that you're going to get out of people. I think now is the time where we should be bringing some serious questions to these debates and really pushing people to give specifics. We've got two candidates now. They'll each have more time to talk. They should both be put to the fire with very, very specific questions about how they're going to deal with these huge financial issues that we've got, region-wide, but specifically here in the epicenter of Chicago.
But it goes back to what you were saying earlier, is already the narrative is, and I've been on a couple of programs already, and the narrative is how smart Rahm Emanuel is. As if he, and I said, so you're saying that you're talking as if he's the smartest person in the room. And so we're supposed to, so they're doing, Chewy is nice, is a nice guy, and Rahm is smart. So that's code too, for Chewy is too nice to run a city like Chicago, and Rahm is up to the job.
Yeah, white basketball players work really hard, and black basketball players are athletically talented. Just a quick procedural reminder to all the panelists, make sure, some of us like me are natural shouters, but for the rest of you guys who actually normally speak at pleasant volumes, make sure you're projecting and talking right into the mic so everyone can hear you, and so all the audience on CAN TV can hear you as well. Before we move on from Willie Wilson, there was a somewhat controversial incident in the middle of the campaign where he spoke to the City Club of Chicago, and the Sun-Times quoted him as addressing the City Club as whiteys. And his campaign said, and I understand from friends at the Sun-Times that they went over the tape many times, and that's what multiple people heard was him say whiteys. But as a couple of you have pointed out, Willie Wilson, 7th grade education, doesn't necessarily speak in the King's English, and his campaign came back very strongly and said, that is not what he said. He said something like, all you whites out there, not whiteys. And they actually went ahead, I'm told, and questioned whether the reporter understands English, and sort of tried to flip the challenge that way. But the question I'm asking is, again, this issue of a candidate who doesn't speak in any kind of mainstream way. How did the meeting handle that? Did the Sun-Times do the right thing, or was anybody else present at that speech?
I didn't know what Willie Wilson was saying 3/4 of the time. Believe me, I mean, we would sit there in the edit room, and I would struggle to find 6 or 7.
He's intelligent?
But he is intelligent. He just can't speak. I mean, it's different. There are two different things here we're talking about. clearly, he has a high acumen for business, but I don't want to digress. So I found it interesting that nobody could understand. In fact, the joke was that, well, we're all journalists here. Sometimes he'd be referred to as the Pootie Tang of Chicago politics. Any of you familiar with Pootie Tang? Yeah, he was the Pootie Tang of Chicago politics. Nobody could understand what he was talking about half the time, or most of the time. But then suddenly he says Whitey, and everybody knows what he's talking about.
But can I give you an incident that happened too? We've had some other mayors. We've had mayors who couldn't talk so well.
Richard M. Daley
to
come to
Channel 5.
And as a matter of fact, we've mostly had mayors who couldn't talk very well.
Let me remind you something. This was a Dick Kay report. And it goes back to what Mark was talking about when it was too late. And they caught Daley in Bridgeport saying, vote for me so that you can have a white mayor.
A wet mayor.
No,
mayor,
he said, white mayor. They said, you, media said, that he said wet for 1 week, 1 solid week on TV. You played back, wet, white, wet, white. Was it white or was it wet? Now, what the hell is a wet mayor? Okay, and so after a week of absolutely being ridiculous, these are the reasons I started Indigo. After 1 week of being absolutely ridiculous, they took it off and dropped the conversation because somebody said, what's a wet mayor? But it was white and it was wet.
Well, clearly it's someone who likes to drink a lot, and we all want that person to be on the job.
Remember that?
Hermine, how would you have covered, since you have the mic and I'll put you on the spot, how would you have covered the Whitey, not Whitey speech?
I would have called it out. I would have said Willie Wilson with his no-talking self, Poontang, what you call him, Poontang? Pootie Tang, Pookie, Ebonics conversation, said Whitey. And he probably, I wasn't there, but I did hear the tape. And he did say Whitey. Now, what he meant. He trying to say anything. Well, but you keep calling him intelligent, but you don't understand him. So how can you be intelligent and you don't understand? Come on, Charles, stop that.
All right, no. Mark, did your paper handle that whole thing the right way?
Oh, you can make me second guess my paper?
I am.
Well, let's just say, I think this was, I saw this unfold, right? And I wasn't there at City Club, and I have heard the tapes afterwards, and I had interviewed Willie Wilson several times before. So let me just say that this was and I'm the one who suggested that we talk about this today. It was a great example of how newsrooms need white and black people both. I mean, they need a racial mix because you know, I thought it sounded like Whitey's, but I dealt with Willie enough to know you couldn't really tell what he was saying a lot of the times. And White's is here, I think is what he said. And honestly, you could hear that in there too. And I've talked to, now Mary Mitchell and I had quite a conversation about it. It's one of the great things about the Sun-Times is we got Mary, we got me, we talk about this stuff. We're totally, on the other side, we perceive things totally differently and are still friends. And I think there's another topic that's going to come up here today that we see it from a different point of view. But, in the modern newspaper, you get something, you slap it up, and nobody stopped to run it through of, okay, would someone of a different race think this is what it was said? And it wasn't until later that other people said, hey, that's not what he said.
But this has gone on several times. I mean, you talk about Daley, and certainly we all remember that. And I lean toward he said white instead of wet.
And then there was the whole question of what his intention was. Was it just a slip of the tongue? Should we have been going after him if he just made a mistake?
I think when Daley said it in his Bridgeport enclave, he meant what he said and what we thought he said. But I remember, too, the way the media treated Sawyer and calling him Mayor Mumbles and those kinds of things. And certainly Sawyer did not sound like Willie Wilson. And so, I mean, I think there has been some kind of evolving in terms of being accepting of Willie Wilson as a credible candidate mainly because he had money, though. Had he not had any money, he would have been torn to shreds. But the fact that he had some money, all of a sudden that gave him credibility and raised him up in terms of how his coverage was.
To your original question, though, I think the most important thing is, yes, we need to cover these things, but we have to be fair about it. Mm-hmm. We have to cover them fairly regardless of the race of the person who said it. And we need to be able to present sides and put up a factual, here's what's happening, here's what people are talking about it, and not send it out in a tweet with some incredibly clickbaity, title on it that spurs people to believe something that maybe it isn't. I mean, yes, there should be news coverage, but it should be intrinsically fair. Okay,
but doesn't it matter who said it? I mean, some of the things that Willie Wilson said, he said something to me about, when I came here 40 years ago, or whatever it was, 45 years ago, the West Side looked like Haiti. And if Rahm Emanuel said that, we would, I think, probably be all over him. So I guess my question is, doesn't it matter who says, not only what they say, but who says it? And then the corollary question is, how do each of you guys think about your own background and race when you're covering politics and public policy?
Let me start with what you said. I think it also is important when you say it. Keep in mind, I think it was 1988, 87, 88, 89. I don't know what year, when the wet mayor, when that comment was made. Keep in mind, this city, 89, this city was in a racial upheaval. It was Beirut by the lake. It was terrible. So race was already there. So when he said it, clearly that was the question. Willie Wilson, who had just come off this campaign where he went out on a limb and supported Bruce Rauner against the grain. He's been out there in business all these years, clearly doing business across racial lines. I mean, you got to go some, just make Willie Wilson into some kind of racist. To your second question, if we can move on. I was doing a lot of stories since last summer, really since last spring, about how Rahm Emanuel had lost support in the African American community. In fact, Rahm Emanuel, I think, had 59%. He scored 59% of the vote in 2011 in a race with two African American candidates. Then suddenly, the Tribune, I believe, did a poll, and they had Rahm Emanuel with like single digits support in the African American community. And I kept doing stories about it because I thought it was fascinating. And I had the mayor's people actually come to me and say, hey, you need to slow down on that story. You're becoming a one-trick pony. All you do. And I started to ask myself, am I doing this? Am I doing this because I'm black and I think it's more important, and do I need to chill out? But I kept doing the stories anyway. And I really wondered, and is the black vote that critical? Well, as it turned out, I covered the governor's race, and that's where it went, the black vote, not only with Pat Quinn, but also with Bruce Rauner. Then, of course, the mayor's race starts, and the black vote. It's always the black vote. Why is the black vote so important in Illinois and Chicago? And because the politicians obviously think it is, because they really make the play for it. But then, in between the elections, nothing happens for the black community from these very same politicians.
Well, so it's something in short, it's something you do wrestle with a little bit.
Well, I have to, because when people, especially when somebody from the mayor's office says to you that you're going overboard on that story, aren't you?
That generally means you're on the right track and you should keep at it.
Right.
Esther, what about you?
Well, Well, you know, as a journalist, you don't want to sort of get pigeonholed as the Hispanic vote reporter, the immigration reporter, the this, that, or the other reporter. But the fact of the matter is that we represent all of us here represent a constituency, and some of us here represent a constituency that doesn't get enough play, enough airtime, enough consideration. So yeah, we're going to go for these angles as honestly as we can, but we're going to look into it. I mean, regardless of what it's going to come out. When I look at something like the Hispanic vote, I'm trying to look at what's actually happening out there as opposed to what I wish would happen out there. I mean, you know, anytime you're doing anything, regardless of whether it's straight reporting or opinion reporting, your facts have to be what they are, and you have to report those facts as they are. So to me, I think it's both important to call out these special issues that maybe, you know, some editors might not think of naturally, but you know, you always have to be very honest and very clear about it. And we're all here to do community service. I mean, that's what journalism is about. So I'm sure that's as important to me as it is to anybody else on this panel.
Everybody brings their life experience to journalism, and to say that you don't is a lie. The whole purpose, when I was a TV reporter, the whole purpose of me being in the newsroom, as far as I was concerned, was to make sure the other side got heard. And I heard from viewers, I heard from viewers who, when I was a reporter in Norfolk, Virginia, say to me, all you do is cover black stories. And my response was, and do you sit up there and count how many white stories I do? Because I do far more white stories than I do black stories. But I clamored for the black stories because I wanted to make sure those stories got covered.
If not us, who? Right?
Exactly.
If the newsrooms were balanced, if the newsrooms were equal, this would not be a question, but the newsrooms are not. So if she doesn't cover the Hispanic story, it probably won't be covered. If we don't cover the black story, it probably won't be covered. That's number one. But number two, because you've got a black person or a Hispanic in the newsroom, that does not mean that that necessarily is the view. Because what the white media, mainstream media, tends to do, stereotype, monolithic, generic, we're all the same. Well, the Hispanics told me. No, one or two or three Hispanics told you. Willie Wilson does not represent the black community. Now,
how do you really feel about Willie Wilson?
I'm telling you. Read Indigo. Go on the website, indigo.com, you'll see. But what I'm saying is that is a view, but it's not the view. And so when whites cover whites, they cover the view. You got the view on Bush, the view on Reagan, the view on Obama, but it is not the view. It is a view. So that's where it gets murky.
Del Marie wants to wrest the microphone from your
Here's
hands.
an example. In the race of the mainstream media missing the story in the black community, in the last statewide races or for state representatives, all I heard was, and this was in my district, so it was Christian Mitchell and Jay Travis, and all I heard in the white media was the pension, that is the issue in this race. Pensions, that is the issue in this race. Every story I picked up, that's what they were saying. And I'm like, that is not the issue in this race.
And Christian had cast what was seen as a controversial vote in favor of the pension reform legislation.
That was the issue in the race for white people. The issue in the race for black people was the school closings, which is why he almost lost. Had his district not gone north, he would have lost because he lost every black ward. And that's the difference. And that's what I'm saying. I knew as soon as I read it that that was not the issue in my community. That was only the issue. If you don't have a job, you're not worried about pensions. You're worried about schools. And so that's two different viewpoints. But when I picked up every political reporter who was writing, that's what they said. So who are they talking to? They're not talking to the people in the community. The same thing for, I did a race, and I redid the race this time in the 17th Ward. And the last time in 2011, the media were obsessed with the rapper and the cop, the 20th ward. That was the sexy election. And that's all you saw, the rapper and the cop. Now, at the end of that race, neither the rapper nor the cop would have had any power. In the 17th ward, which was the race I was working on, my candidate didn't have any money. He was going up against a 4-time alderman who Mayor Daley came out, Mayor Rahm came out, Mayor-elect Rahm came out, Janulius came out, Tony Pretwinkle came out, Walmart promised 2 Walmarts, and she hadn't even been in the Walmart fight. So that told me...
And don't forget the most, probably perhaps the most famous black preacher in Chicago who is a white Catholic pastor,
right.
Father Flager.
They all came out, and I said, I don't have any money for a poll, but I can read tea leaves, and the tea leaves are telling me she's losing, because that never happens on the south side of Chicago, all of those people coming out for an incumbent. So as it turns out, we were outspent 10-1. We lost by 300 votes. So this time, this was part 2, but why that race was important was not because of LaTosha Thomas, but it was because of Father Flager and Terry Peterson. Because the first news conference that Rahm Emanuel held to announce Forrest Claypool was going to be the head of CTA, Terry Peterson was standing right next to him as the chairman of CTA. And that's why that race was important. But the white media, because their definition of power is different from our definition of power, missed that story completely.
Okay, yet Christian Mitchell, to cite your early example, won. He won the race despite what appeared to be, and I think my colleagues and I thought there was going to be an uprising because the people we were in closest contact in that district were cocoa and cocoa activists who were, #1 item in last election was try to get rid of Christian Mitchell. And so I guess, and so in our attempt to sort of go the other way, we reached out to the activists we knew in the African American community. It turned out they were outnumbered at the polls by the white voters in the rest of the district. So I guess you can find out that you need a corrective in various directions, right?
Correct.
Mark, what about you? How do you think about your background and race when you're trying to cover something, cover politics specifically?
Well, first of all, let me just explain to the audience what my background is. I'm obviously a white guy. I'm from Central Illinois, not an area known for its enlightenment. Grew up in a period without, I grew up in a town with no African Americans where, the reputation was that you couldn't have African Americans on my side of the river after a certain time of night. So I bring that to everything I do. I think I'm a fair person, but I have to know who I am and where I came from, and I have to dig down sometimes and recognize, what my beliefs are, whether I have some prejudice in this situation. I don't mean we all have prejudices. So I try to recognize mine, deal with mine. And a lot of times I chicken out on racial stuff and leave it to poor Mary, who I always know she's gonna jump in there, and so sometimes I'll chicken out and let her do it. Now, this past week, I thought I saw a story about what I think is playing out now in the mayor's race, where it's not just white-black tensions in this city. There are black Hispanic tensions, and so I tried to write about that. And before I did, I went to Mary and said, "One of us has got to do this. Who's going to do it first?" And she says, she didn't have the stomach for it that day, so I jumped in there and I called Del Marie and others and tried to handle it as best I can. And Mary tells me I didn't quite get it right, so you should read tomorrow's Sun-Times, and she'll try to set me straight. I try to report it out. That's part of what makes me a little different than some columnists. You know, I'll try to reach out and figure out, you know, what I'm missing.
All right, so that's, in case people didn't read your column, it's essentially about, hey, there's this thing going on that a lot of people aren't talking about, even though it's very real, and it is this tension between African Americans and Latinos, especially in the political realm, coming out of the Daley years where there was a clear political strategy to try to knock out Hispanic independence. And by the way, you know, the African American independence had already been knocked out. So the second wave, I guess, was knock out the Hispanic independence and to build this patronage army called the Hispanic Democratic Organization, which was led by as many white guys as there were Latino guys. But the point was, this was a real strategy to try to bring Hispanics into the patronage system under Richard M. Daley. And so, Mark, you're picking up on this now and saying, here we are in a new era, and everybody seems to be, both the candidates seem to need African-American votes, but there's real tension, and this is a real issue for Chewy. It's one of the emerging themes of the race. Okay, so after all that, my question is, how should we be making sure that we're not putting this theme out there, that we're not helping to divide the city? Are we creating this theme by talking about it, by writing about it? How do you guys feel? Is it a very real thing, or are we just in the media always looking for that conflict because it makes better stories?
You're not qualified to write about it. White folks are not qualified, I don't think.
Oh, really? I'm a reporter.
No, I don't.
Most of the people I write about, I don't know how they live or do.
No,
I write about politicians.
But you've got to go to some real Hispanics and ask them about it. You got to go to some real black folks and ask them about it.
As opposed to fake black folks?
Yep, fake black folks and fake Hispanic folks too. Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm saying is you probably, and I don't mean you, but white folks probably don't know the difference. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, so let me just make sure I get this straight. Me as a political reporter, been living in Chicago for 20 years and writing about this stuff for 15, if I don't write about the black Latino divide, then I'm just writing about white stuff. But if I do, then I might be talking to fake blacks or Latinos. Esther?
I think
wait a minute. Let me qualify what I mean, because don't put it that simple, because it's not that simple.
Okay.
I'm talking about genuine, and I'm talking about authentic. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about real, and I'm talking about authenticity. Let me give you one example. When Jesse Jackson ran, the white media at large, why are you running? What do you really want? Nobody ever took that seriously to say, I want to be president of the United States, that's why I'm running. It was like, what's the underline here? What's the real deal here? What are you trying to do here? What white media tends to do is you have 3 or 4 folks that you talk to constantly. And those 3 or 4 folks might tell you what you want to hear, but they might not give you the real sentiment. The tension between the black and Hispanic is that when Hispanics get in, they too exclude black folks, just like white folks. They exclude us too. They put an X on us too. No contracts, no jobs, no nothing. All the Hispanics come in. In the white world, that's okay because all of you all are minorities, and we fulfill the minority requirement that way too. That's what happens, and that's the tension. UNO didn't include black people. Rainbow Coalition did, included Hispanics. Therein is your difference. So when I say talk about it authentically, it's not talk about it to those who are politically astute and politically inside. It's go down there to Pilsen Village and sit in the restaurant and talk to one of those guys there and let them tell you what the tension is, because there is a real tension.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say you are qualified to report on that story if you do your work and you talk to a wide variety, a diversity of people, and not just the executive director of this organization or the communications chief of that organization. Mark, you said that you did your reporting. I'm interested to know who did you speak to on the other side? What Hispanic organizations did you speak to?
Charles is about to tear the mic out of your hand. So we'll put Mark on the spot in a second. But
First of all,
I didn't talk to any organizations. How's that?
But did you talk to Hispanics?
Yes.
Okay, well,
Yes.
see, then the point is that you talk to both, right?
Yeah.
I let me tell you, I probably, man, I looked at I live in the West Loop. I am as black as anybody who lives in Inglewood. I am a black man and proud of it. I am. And there are black men who live in Winnetka, brain surgeons, a brain surgeon that I know. There are multimillionaire black people that live in DuPage County. They are black people. When we start trying to define ourselves in some socioeconomic group or in some geographic area as black people, that just doesn't happen anymore. That used to be the situation where when we had to live with each other, but we don't have to anymore. And we have this. I think the danger is sometimes we only go to the civil rights activists and talk to them about what's happening in the black community, or we go to people who are elected officials. Like I saw Bobby Rush doing his thing with Rahm Emanuel when he endorsed Rahm Emanuel. And that supposedly is sending a signal to black folks about that we should go out and run out and vote for Rahm Emanuel. I don't think that plays anymore. I mean, we come in all shapes, sizes, economic conditions. We're young, we're old, we're gay, we're straight. That's black folks. Yes, we do suffer. We have a common struggle that we are all aware of, and I think that's what that's what defines us. And I think that if you have a sense of struggle and where we've been over these 400 years, then that's our common experience.
okay, but Mark's got to get his column in. He's got 3 or how many of these? 4 to write a week. And how many people should he realistically talk to? And we're using Mark as an example. Mark.
Hey, I've already just from listening to here, I've already feel like I hit it right on the head. Even if they tell me that I didn't talk to enough people.
No, I think you hit it. I think if you talk to some black folks,
so
I think you have to identify who the black folks are you talk to, and what the context they have is for the story. Why am I talking to this person? I think the writer can do that and can do it in fairly short order. He can explain why I talk to this person. But black folks, we're everywhere.
And Mick, I mean, I've known you probably since you first started, and you're an exception in terms of.
That's what I was really going for. Thanks. Panel's over. Thank you all for coming.
And I say that, I mean, there's a handful, and you're one of them. So I don't think you can take it personally when somebody says they're not, that the white media aren't doing their job, because in many cases they aren't. But we also know, even though we understand that we're all black, we also know that there are those who are black and are selling us out on a daily basis. We know that. And we know who they are if you've been out here long enough. And I think if you've been out here long enough and know who they are, and you go and talk to each of them, and don't just talk to them as they're the ones who are going to speak for the black community, because they're not speaking for the black community, they're speaking for themselves. Because they're this is the people I call in the room people. Because
everybody's talking for himself.
Not everybody. No, not everybody. I mean, when I'm interviewed, I'm not just talking for Del Marie. I'm sharing the black community.
No, I'm not that presumptuous.
Well, but you made the same point that if you're talking to the executive director of an advocacy group, they're not talking just for themselves.
But they're talking, but that's who it is, and as long as you put them in the context.
Now, I'm not saying,
yeah.
I mean,
and I'm not saying
this-
I'm talking for all black people, because clearly there's a group of the cabal that's running Chicago right now, the cabal of black people who are running Chicago right now. I am not talking for them, and they're not talking for me.
So I think one simple takeaway I'm asking this question is for everybody, no matter who you are, to recognize there is tremendous diversity within every community. We talk here about black, brown, and white, but each one of them has obviously, I mean, this should be obvious at this point in time, and I'm guessing that most of the people in this room probably already know this, but it's a point worth making that I think it's something we're all pointing out, is that there is not ubiquity within any of these groups. There's not
Heterogeneity.
Heterogeneity. Yeah, there you go. All right. We just said that. That's right. This is CAN TV, folks. Everyone is, they're still with us. They're still with us. All right, let's transition just a little bit. I wanted to just throw a couple specific situations out there. 4 years ago, there was a labor leader who referred to Rahm Emanuel as Judas. And I think it was ostensibly over his position on cutting the public payroll and pension, quote unquote, reform, and other such things, but that was widely interpreted as an anti-Semitic remark. So far, I haven't heard one thing about Rahm Emanuel's being Jewish and the first Jewish mayor. That hasn't come up at all. Have you guys heard anything? Should that be an issue? Is it something we should be bringing up? What's the line?
He made clear how proud he was about that, and he's made that an aspect, but not an overriding aspect of it. So I always feel like he mentions it, so we don't have to, and I never see it made a big deal of. I don't.
Well, when I saw I believe two of the Jewish papers didn't endorse him, I thought that was worthy of a story.
Yeah.
And I think that was a story. And one endorsed Fioretti, and I believe the other one endorsed Jesus, I'm not sure. But I think that was significant. And the reasons they gave for not endorsing him were significant. And that was his ignoring of the communities.
Okay. So if other people brought it up, then we should go on it, but it's something we don't necessarily need to bring up this time around. That's what you guys.
Well, I mean, are we all, is the Jewish vote something that we talk about a lot in Chicago? It's not. I mean, if there were like tangible reasons for it, if we had a community that was, I don't know, if they themselves were just out there talking about themselves and making noise, I think we would.
Well, he didn't hesitate to say that the Chicago Defender endorsed him.
Right.
So I don't think we should hesitate to say that two Jewish papers didn't endorse him.
All right, there you go. There was an incident within his first few months in office where Karen Lewis, the Chicago Teachers Union president, came out and said that in a private conversation, I think the one private conversation that she and Mayor Emanuel have had since he's been in office, that he told her, "F you, Lewis." And that was widely reported. It was seen as very disrespectful. Now, I don't know Karen Lewis well, but I know her a little bit. I find it hard to believe that she wouldn't have sat there and had some version of F you right back to him.
Well, she said it didn't go unanswered.
She said it didn't go unanswered. Okay, so was the coverage, thinking about the coverage of that, and then of Karen Lewis subsequently becoming not just a union leader, but a major political figure in the city and beyond, and sort of the way that she's often portrayed, the fiery Karen Lewis. I mean, almost every time she's introduced, the fiery Karen Lewis. Was the coverage of the alleged, not so hard to believe, F-bomb incident, was that on the money? Should we be describing her as fiery? Is there something racial about all of that?
If somebody says F you to a black woman, you probably need to be on guard. A fight is probably brewing. You probably are not going to sit there and cry. You're probably going to say, "It's on, buddy." Okay, now I know that story because after it was done, I saw Karen the next day at dinner. So I got it full. But I was also asked by her, "Please don't write about it. You all didn't get that story good." Okay, that ain't all he said to her. And she did not cry. She reacted. That's why we're here today, is because she really reacted. And it was like, let me go to work. Let me help you out, my man. And that is why we're here today having this conversation. That's why Rahm is in a runoff. Is she fiery? She's supposed to be. Yes, she is, and she's supposed to be fiery. You are not going to run a teachers union in the city of Chicago being a lamb. If you aren't, that's a prerequisite for the job, is to be fiery. You are not going to tell the teachers, well, you know, we might have to take the pension and we might not pay you, and go pray about it. You're going to put some fire up under the union folks and say, hey, let's charge, let's go, let's fight. The fights in Chicago, the political fights in Chicago, if you think about it, they've always been educational based. Yeah. They're always about education. And so you're not going to just bow your head and thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and wow, I wish you wouldn't have said that to me, and go home. It's on. The war was declared. That was drawing in the sand. Your side, my side, union side, teacher side, Karen side, Rahm side, black side. Y'all can fix that up any way you want to. That was on. And no, the press did not cover that in detail.
What I would say about the term fiery, though, is that to me it doesn't speak to, it's not like a button pushing kind of thing. If the media had called her angry, we'd be having a different discussion. Now, if Karen Lewis was Hispanic and they'd called her fiery, there'd be people that would be angry. Because that's, again, that's the button pushing word. The fiery Latina, the angry black woman, the this and that and the other. I mean, we have these phrases that are shorthand. I never had my flag go up because I thought, okay, calling Karen Lewis fiery is very appropriate, and I didn't see that as being some kind of coded sort of language. Had she been Hispanic and they called her fiery, you know, I'd been the first to call that out.
But we don't introduce Rahm Emanuel by saying the a-hole Rahm Emanuel, although arguably
really, because it seems
should.
like that's the subtext.
Well, and that's my point. That's my point. Why do we attach fiery to Karen Lewis in particular? All right, so maybe it's better than angry because of certain stereotypes, but I don't know. I think it kind of gets at the same thing. Am I wrong?
Now, I think people call Rahm Emanuel out on his attitude all the time.
Well,
I think the very reason that we're having this, the very reason that it's believable that he said "F you, Karen Lewis," is because of who he is and his reputation. And I think that we have reported that over and over again. I think we may have even gone overboard with it, the dead fish in the newspaper and all the things about Rahm Emanuel that we've been doing for the last 5-10 years. And that's why I think it was believable that he said this to Karen Lewis, because of the image of him that we built up.
But the other part of that is she has been hit based on image. And had she, and I don't believe that if she were a white woman, that would have just been taken for granted and reported without sanction. I believe there would have been editorials on it and everything, and there weren't. I didn't see, I think there should have been an inordinate number of African American men stepping up and saying, absolutely, this is absolutely unacceptable to talk to a black woman like this, or to any woman like this. I didn't see that at all, because the attitude is that as a black woman, you can take care of yourself and we don't need to stand up for you, you can stand up for yourself. And yes, she can, and we can. But that doesn't mean we don't need the community to say, you know what, this is unacceptable. This is not how you talk to one of ours, and don't ever do it again.
One of the worst, Mark, this is for you, one of the worst articles, most insulting articles that I've ever read was written by a black woman, and Dale, you and I talked about this. It was written by a black woman in the Sun-Times who said that Karen Lewis was a triple threat, called her nappy-headed, called her fat, and you said she was with braids, and therefore she was a triple. That was... And she was nappy-headed, black and fat.
This was in the Sun-Times?
Yes, sir.
And I
yes, sir.
And I wrote a response to it because
and it
I
was
insulted.
It was just insulting. So
Now, wasn't the point of that to say that that wasn't fair, but that would be the reality? That the reality would be that as an overweight black woman with braids, that she was going to face 3 levels of discrimination.
So
I thought that was the point of the column.
So would you say Rom was short, 1 finger missing, and a Jew?
And a ballerina.
And a ballerina? And
Well, his
cussing?
nickname, and I've reported this, his nickname among a lot of city workers is Tiny Dancer.
But you don't
So
talk about his
I think that's fair
finger.
game.
Sure they do.
You don't do that. That's
Yeah, they do.
no, not like they did with.
Okay,
Karen.
so how candid should we be? I mean, again, we don't have this column in
You
front of
shouldn't
us to
talk
dissect
about
it.
people's physical appearance. You ought to talk
But
about.
people do, Hermine.
But
People
you-
talk about it.
You asked me what should you do. I'm trying to tell you what you should do. You ought to stay on policy. You ought to stay on program. You ought to stay on attitudes. You ought to stay on actions. He can't help his finger got cut off. She can't, maybe she can't help being fat. You know, being fat, what's that got to do with it? That doesn't have any, her hair is nappy. What's that got to do with her being a union leader and pointing out some things? That's not right. That's wrong.
Chris Christie's getting killed over being fat all over the country all the time.
And for
I
being
mean,
corrupt and under investigation.
exactly,
But yes.
but that adds to it, right? But that just adds to it. You're right that we shouldn't be talking about anything but policy.
But it wasn't.
You're
the,
right, but
and it
we
wasn't
do.
the only column about it, and that's why I wound up writing a column in response to it, because since it was the first one, I let go. The second one, I took it personally as a black woman, and that was how I titled my column, "Black Like Me," because I didn't see, when I look at Karen, I see me. No, I'm not 6 feet tall, and I don't weigh what she weighs, and I don't look like she looks. But she still, when I look at her, I see me. And an attack on her is an attack on me.
I guess the question I'm raising as the moderator, and don't get me wrong, I'm not defending that column or more importantly, the fact that people say this out in the public. I'm just asking the question of which ugly truths should we be writing about and which ones shouldn't we not? Because I think the attempt of that column, which I think at least a large portion of the panel remembers very clearly as a failed effort on a number of levels, but I believe the intention of that column was to just say, not that it was okay that those things were being said, but that the reality is they will be said, and the potential handicaps in a mayoral race, because people make some very shallow decisions at the voting booth. That is a fact of the matter, so should we not be talking about it?
Well, I did the first story with Karen Lewis. You know, she went to Hawaii. You guys got to help me here. I remember when she came back from Hawaii, she did her first interview when she was considering, she said she'd formed an exploratory committee, and she was actually in Hawaii at the time. And she had been MIA, missing in action, for like weeks. She came back, and the station said she will do one-on-one interviews, and I went over to the Merchandise Mart, and I did an interview with her. She walked in the room. My goodness, she must have been 50, 60 pounds lighter than when I saw her before.
Why you do that for?
Wait a minute. I wrote my story. The first line in my story was, looking, I don't remember the exact words, but I made the first line out of my mouth of looking slimmer or having as though she'd lost weight. Karen Lewis is back on the job at the teachers union. Woo! Did I get beat up for that? And I thought it was relevant. I mean, she's going to run for mayor, and she's been missing for like a month. This was last January, I think. And she came back from Hawaii, and she had clearly had lost 50 pounds. And I said something about it. And everybody got all bent out of shape. Not everybody, because my editor thought it was fine, but people would call the station. There were a few calls, said, you shouldn't be mentioning her weight. Well, wait a minute. She's running for mayor, and clearly she looks like she's getting ready for a run of some sort.
Did you think that as a man you didn't have the right to say that?
No, I didn't. I thought she wants to be a public official, and she looked healthy.
There's a double.
She looked healthier than she was.
Double standard.
No.
Yes.
If I lost,
You won't call Willie
look,
Wilson
if
ignorant.
Chris Christie lost,
But you won't call Willie Wilson
50
ignorant.
pounds.
You won't call Willie Wilson ignorant.
I didn't call it.
You said he can't talk.
That's
You don't
pejorative. That word is.
understand him. But Karen lost weight, and that's a story.
No, it's
Call
not
Willie,
a story.
Call
It was
Willie
part
the
of
master
the
of
story.
ebonics. You know Willie does not have a PhD.
Willie Wilson.
All right,
back
all
on
right,
Willie
all right.
Wilson.
This is great. We'll. This is good,
Willie
but just
has- we
I want
called
to
him
get a
Dr.
couple.
Can I just say real quickly, you know,
Where did
Please.
your PhD
I get that.
come from? Where did what was your thesis about? What was the title of
But
it, Willie?
if people are talking about it, people are going to notice.
You all gave Willie just okay, man. He can't talk. It's okay. He filled out the form for the editorial board. It was incomprehensible, but it's okay. Come on, Willie. Karen lose
All right,
50
look,
pounds.
let me
Hold
address that.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. Hold on a second.
really get down?
I'm earning big bucks as the moderator of the panel. Let me play my role for a second. All right. I'll be really rude for a second, or blunt, depending on your perspective, and and just report back to you that I heard people say, Karen Lewis can't manage her own weight. How could she manage the city?
That's exactly what they say about Chris Christie.
So where, at what level? My point again is, and Chris Christie, the same thing. That guy's. I've heard people say he's a fat slob.
If he lost 50 pounds, everyone would know about it within the first minute.
Okay, so when should we talk about it? Okay, when should we talk about it? Mark?
All I was going to say was, when you write anything favorable about Karen Lewis, or you basically write about her at all, you get people, a lot of people, writing in about her weight, and her weight became a substitute for, I could clearly see it, for racists. We can't talk about her being black, so we're going to talk about her being fat. And
it's still somewhat acceptable.
I don't know how to deal with it.
Could you talk about her being
Jewish?
Jewish? Could you talk about the black woman being Jewish? Do we know what synagogue she goes to? Do we know when she converted?
Should we ask those things?
I think we were all interested.
If you're going to call her a fat Jew. Call her the fat black Jew.
As a former reporter, I actually didn't have a problem with that, saying she lost weight, because to me it was about getting in fighting shape, and that's how I would have set it up. That obviously she's getting in shape for the fight of her life.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if Rahm Emanuel grew a big, bristly mustache, we would totally talk about that, because Chuy Garcia...
First of all, his vote totals would double if he did that.
Because Chuy Garcia has embraced that, the whole mustache thing. He's made it a meme. His campaign's made all of his buttons about it. And he's a Mexican guy with a big, bristly mustache. I mean, that invites a lot of parody. I'm surprised I haven't seen more memes of him in a serape with a giant hat on. But my point is that with a big sombrero on, but my point is that if Rahm Emanuel grew a mustache and, there was a mustache-a-thon, we would certainly talk about it.
All right. Let's transition away from this, even though I'm reluctant to do so. This is great. But a question that has come to me from a couple different sources is just going back a couple years before Tony Preckwinkle was the county board president, Todd Stroger was. And Todd Stroger was just beaten up pretty much from the day that he was picked in literally a back room. I guess it wasn't smoky because you couldn't smoke indoors anymore, but it was so hot in that room at the Hotel Allegro that it felt like it was a smoky back room. But when the Democratic Party players, all the committeemen, chose Todd Stroger to be the candidate for his father, and then he ended up being the board president, almost from the day he went in, he was attacked. He was ignorant. He was in over his head. The guy, he looked like a buffoon. He couldn't do the job. And meanwhile, we had our mayor, who had served for 20 years, could hardly complete a sentence. When he did, it wasn't clear to me all the time that it was English. Even when he was threatening, by the way, to shove a gun up my rear end. It was mostly a little giggle that he did that sounded a lot like Beavis and Butthead. There wasn't that many. But my point is, Mayor Daley, he's the steady hand. He's the lifelong mayor. I think if he ran for office in 2011, maybe even now, he would have won the job. Todd Stroger paced it. Was that a double standard?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
I remember this one story I covered. It was Dick Simpson, who was a political science professor at UIC, and he does this annual report on corruption. And this was in the, I guess, maybe 2009, 10, Daley was still in office. And Dick Simpson, and I believe it was the Better Government Association. Was Andy Shaw with him? I don't know, but the Better Government Association was with Dick, and they were doing a report on corruption. And they were standing in front of Todd Stroger's office on the 5th floor at the county building talking about corruption in Chicago and Cook County. And Daley at this point had like 25 people who had been indicted, some sitting in prison, Sorich and all those guys, right down the hall, like 75 feet away. But they chose to do the press conference in front of Todd Stroger's office. And I went like, what? Why don't you do it in front of the mayor's office? No, because, it was covered, and, and Todd, I think, had to respond or whatever, or one of his people did. But it was like, whoa, what is going on? I mean, Daley got the biggest pass.
And in some cases, the media would interpret what he meant.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I've seen stories where they said, well, he really meant to say.
Here's my theory. Let me say my theory.
By the way, that was the first Mayor Daley. Remember his press person? That was his famous line. Write what he means, not what he said.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's what I was about to say. He said, say what he means, not what he said. But that was a standard in the press.
But they did the same thing to Roland Burrs, too. The exact same thing was done to him. And it was the same group of progressives who did it to him. And that's one of the reasons why I was so upset, because a lot of those guys I have worked with side by side, shoulder to shoulder. And I thought, now you find it so incomprehensible and you're compelled to beat this man up, who never had a scandal associated with him in all the years he was the comptroller and the attorney general. But now you're just absolutely compelled to talk about him, and you haven't said a word about Daley in 20 years. And he's one of the most corrupt and more scandals associated with his administration than any administration. And Mark Kirk went on to put in a campaign ad, that Roland Burrs was the most corrupt politician in Illinois history.
Wow.
And everybody knows that's a lie. And not one person said anything, denounced it.
Well, and to the point for Todd Stroger. Todd Stroger did not have social graces. He was just not there. But to his good credit, that penny that he raised the taxes on, he was the only one.
The sales tax.
The sales tax. He was the only one with a balanced budget.
Yeah.
And he, in 4 years. Now, he bit the bullet, and he did what he had to do. Social graces, sorry, they weren't there. Was it an attack on him? Yes. Was it racist? Hell yes.
But here's the racist part too.
Absolutely.
Is that right after Daley won his first election in 1989, the media here it was hands off. Nobody would go after Rich Daley because they knew that as long as there was that partisan primary, that an African American candidate could run against him, get the 38% or whatever it is, and win, as Harold did in a primary. So it was kid glove treatment for Richard M. Daley for the first 6 years or so of his administration. So by the time the media really started, I'm assuming they would want to start covering him again after he was locked in as mayor for life, it was too late. They couldn't do anything with the guy because he had so entrenched himself. But it was kid glove treatment for the first 5, 6, 7 years of his administration. And it was obvious to me.
Let me pause for just a second. Doyle, do we have questions from the audience or? If you filled out cards or have questions for the panel, please Reverend
can you-
Landry will go pick them up, pass them down this way.
Then can you
Okay, so what
imagine-
about Todd Stroger though? Was he, you're saying, okay, he gets credit for raising the taxes, but I think the criticism was he didn't need to raise the tax because there were so many incompetent people on the payroll. He didn't have the stomach or the ability to do anything about it. He was truly an incompetent county board president. That was the narrative. And so what's the balance here? Should reporters, go easier on him? Or
It's not go easy, it's just tell the truth. Daley look, this city now is where it is because of what? And we're all too polite, too scared, or too whatever to say it. Rom skates it. He does not say Daley put us in the hole.
well, no, because
Millennium Park, it was too expensive. You can go on, the Olympics, ha, ha, ha. You could go on and on and on, and you can point to the deal with the parking meters. Bad deal, guys. Bad deal. We don't say that. We just like.
well, some of us have said it.
Well,
Yeah.
some of us have said it, but I'm talking about major press has not dug deep and has not said it.
Well, now they
The deal at Millennium Park, the restaurant deal. Somebody should be in jail for the deal. Any idiot who don't have to pay light bill, pick up the garbage, you don't have to pay rent, and you don't have to pay until you start making a profit, the mortgage back. If you can't make money out of that, God bless you. Shame on you. Nobody wrote about that. People didn't write about that. And it's still going on, and we don't write about it. So let us not kid ourselves. And I don't know what the rule is. I don't know who gets picked on and who doesn't, and who do you give the pass to, and then who do you do the attack to. What they did to Roland Burrs was shameful. Somebody ought to go to jail for what they did to Roland.
What, go to
It's
jail
just
for
sinful.
what?
Attack dogs.
Well, you should go to jail for attacking somebody?
Yes,
slander.
you should. Yeah, you should. That was criminal.
All right.
Remember the clock that the Sun-Times, Sun-Times, Tribune, they ran.
They're not here. We can beat up on them.
They ran a clock, on the like page 2 every day. How many more days until the next election when we can vote Todd? Remember that? They ran that the countdown, the Stroger countdown. Come on, that was like out of control, out of control.
I just always felt like, yes, we should hold him accountable. Yes, you should tell the story. But there was always something in the way that those stories were told, the footage that was used, the pictures that were used, the headlines that were written, that just spoke of a glee on the part of the news outlets.
About Todd Stroger.
About making Todd Stroger this idiot, this bumbling fool.
And they did the same thing with Roland in terms of making him a buffoon. There was a story a column that John Cass wrote some years back, and it was when Roland was running for governor, and he said that some of the black nationalists had met, and in that meeting, they were talking about boycotting. It was because of apartheid in South Africa. And they were talking about boycotting the networks, ABC, NBC, CBS. And somebody said something about the ANC. And Roland said, oh, and we should boycott them too. As if Roland thought the ANC was one of the networks. And so I called John Cass and I said, John, what are you talking about in your column? I said, you're so obsessed with making this man look like a buffoon. Are you saying that a black man would not know what the ANC is? And so at the time, Roland was the comptroller. Roland is the one who divested the money for Illinois from South Africa. But he would not know who the ANC was. And so he thought the ANC was ABC, NBC, or CBS. That's the extent to which the media tried to make him look like a buffoon.
Okay, now in just to transition from that a little bit, the current county board president, Tony Preckwinkle, has for the most part been a media darling. Are we as members of the press, and I've written a lot about her too, have we gone too easy on Tony,
Yes.
on President Preckwinkle?
Yes. Yes, you have.
Why? Why have we gone easier on her?
I think you all like her, and I think there has a lot to do with imagery. I think images have a lot to do with it. Tony is Tony, and I think that's the white darling effect. The white media does not like black men. There's an attack on black political men. The attack on Roland Burris, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm with Dell on this. What Roland Burris was unmerciful and unwarranted and not necessary, and it was wrong.
He didn't have to take the appointment for the
but
empty
he
Senate
was,
seat from Rod Blagojevich, who had already just been indicted,
but,
right?
But he did take, somebody had to take it. He was the perfect guy to take it. So he took an appointment that he was qualified for, therefore we attack him?
From a governor just indicted for trying to sell the seat. You don't see any problem with that?
So it didn't have any, who else was going to appoint? The governor was the only one who could appoint the position. Nobody else could appoint, we couldn't vote.
Nobody had to take it. I don't want to get into a whole debate about whether he should have.
But
we're talking about
listen
the
to what you're
portrayal.
saying. Nobody could take
advocate.
it. So we weren't going to have a senator from the state of Illinois because nobody would take it because Rod was going to jail.
Well, for the record, there were plenty of other people who would have and could have taken it.
But Rod,
and I'm not questioning Burris, Mr. Burris's qualifications. Full disclosure, in 1995, when I was 23 years old, I volunteered for his campaign for mayor. I mean, I always liked Roland Burris, but that's not the point. The point is that the Senate seat, according to the feds, had been put up for sale, and then the person who put it up for sale appointed Roland Burris, and then people started asking questions. Why did you do this? It looked like some sort of deal was at play. And so the question I have for you is, I mean, you two guys are arguing, and you're making a very impassioned argument that in addition to, like, the corruption questions are almost secondary to the way that he was lampooned in the media. What about the rest of you guys?
But we're doing it in comparison to Richard Daley. That's what we're talking about, is the comparison. I mean, when you talk about all the things that Richard Daley did in terms of what we're saying right now, the reason we're in the state we're in right now is what Richard Daley did all along the way because no one called him on it. Do you think that Todd Stroger could have torn up Meigs Field and lasted? Do you think Roland Burris could have torn up Meigs Field and lasted? I mean, yes, he got a slap on the arm. He got a slap on the wrist, and that was it. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. Those kinds of things that there was barely a cry from the crowd or the media. You covered it because it was a story to cover. So you had to cover it. But there was not the kind of harpooning over and over and over and over to the point that you drove him out of office and you revved up the crowd and you incited the mob. That's the difference in the two kinds of coverage.
Okay. Anybody else have anything to add about Senator Burris or Todd Stroger or Tony Preckwinkle before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, to the point that was made earlier, people do like Tony Preckwinkle. People like Lisa Madigan. I don't know what your opinion is of how, for instance, Tony Preckwinkle was treated versus Sandy Jackson. Two different stories, though. Sandy, had a cloud under her, whereas Tony has never been, had any.
Well, if somebody looks at Tony Preckwinkle's husband's deals, might have a cloud over her too.
Maybe.
But we don't
There's
talk
some
about
reason
that.
she decided not to run for mayor. I don't know what it is either, but I'm just saying that's the truth.
Call
Okay.
from the White House.
All right. We talked a little bit about the division between, or this tension that exists and how to report it, how it should be reported between African American and Hispanic communities. A question from the audience is, will Chewy be able to create a black-brown coalition? Or for that matter, I guess, let's be fair to Rahm. Will he be able to, is there any chance in the next few weeks he's going to be able to repair some of the damage in the black community that he's done in the black community?
Well, Chewy is trying to put the band back together again, the Harold Washington Coalition. He's trying to put it back together again, black, brown, and progressives. And I think that is a key question, but I think we need to deal with it in reverse. Is Rahm Emanuel and will his agents be able to exploit what's already there in terms of a divide? And I'm not saying it's a deep divide, but I think one thing that I'm watching very closely is, will someone try to exploit the divide between blacks and Latinos in Chicago? That's an evolving story, a story to watch, let's say, over the next several weeks, because I think it's overrated right now. But this is a place that where the forces for the mayor, place where they conceivably could beat Chuy Garcia by dividing the black and Latino communities.
I think it's a big issue. I think it's one that doesn't get a lot of play. It's a very contentious issue. It's one that I don't think either side wants to get into. I think the best reporting to do with it is with factual research that a lot of the national organizations have done, and hopefully there are other local organizations that have done research on the tensions between Hispanics and blacks in Chicago. But you know, I feel like you're right, it's an evolving story, and I feel like somebody's gonna pull the trigger and it's all gonna come out, and it's all gonna be ugly. You know, it's like we're waiting for that to happen, and it almost seems inevitable, because at some point in the next couple of weeks, someone's gonna get desperate and need something to push them over the edge. And I'm not quite sure which side it'll be, but someone's gonna have to do that unless in the next couple of weeks we see somebody just clearly pull
Well,
ahead.
Rahm Emanuel has already started. I mean, he got the black ministers to denounce Garcia on the Obama Presidential Library. And that, I mean, so that was the first way, separate the South Side from the West Side, the black ministers going after the Latino mayoral candidate. So it's beginning already, because Garcia is from the West Side. So why wouldn't he be for the UIC location? That site that is unencumbered, that is 23 acres of contiguous land that they could build on tomorrow because they own it. So that's his position. Why is he getting beat up? Because he doesn't want parkland taken.
You're either for the library or you're against it, Del Marie. Come
because
on.
UIC, the West Side, is not in Chicago.
Yeah. All right, we're going to keep it moving here. We got a couple questions, and I want to wrap up soon because we've all been sitting here for a little while. This is a great discussion, but just a couple more questions. Mark, I wanted to ask this of you because it's on this black-brown issue again. One of the questions is, instead of the stories about the divisions, why can't we talk about positive examples like Chicago United? Are we not writing enough about the coalitions that already do exist, the progressive groups that are coming together? And I guess you'd argue from the other side. I mean, you know, Rahm Emanuel has been very deliberate in putting some of his Hispanic spokespeople out in front, Susana Mendoza, Congressman Gutierrez. So I guess the question is, are we writing enough positive stories?
No, we're not. How's that? Positive stories.
Why do you laugh at that so much?
I don't know. Anytime somebody says write positive stories, I honestly don't know what to say. For one, on the Black-Brown Coalition, I haven't seen much of it come together yet. So we'll see. If it comes together, I'm sure we'll write about it.
The art of the win of this campaign is who can bring Chicago together, who can unite the city, who can do business development, community development, for all of the city. It's as basic as Barack Obama's speech. One America, not a Hispanic America or a Black America or a white America or a Jewish America, but one Chicago. Who can speak to the one Chicago? That's the message that Chicago is looking for. They will play divide and conquer. That's Rahm's strategy, is go beat somebody up, let's go kick some ass, let's go get them. That's where he is. And it's like, if you would turn that around, my friend, and you would figure out how to unite, that's where your win is. The divide, the black, the brown divide. Harold Washington won on bringing everybody together. It was the dream team. It was the dream coalition. That's where the win is. The win is not for either in the divide. And people see through it. People see through it very, very clearly.
Both the candidates, I think I've heard say that they want to move all of Chicago forward and that kind of thing. So I think that at least, I think you're absolutely right that that is what people want to hear. Now, are they actually doing it when it comes down to counting votes? Which wards do you need to win? And that sort of thing. I don't think that's what the strategy is, and I'm not necessarily sure that it should be in a political campaign where it just comes down to, I need to get more votes than the next guy. But okay, next question. Is writing about economic class as sensitive as race? Do you think there's enough attention paid to class disparities? Do we write enough? Are we more comfortable writing about economics and poverty and wealth as opposed to race? I would throw it out there right away that I think, yes, we are, and we do write about that more openly. But what do you guys think?
I think it's harder to write about class because there are no like super clear lines about what class is. You could be of a certain class because you make a certain amount of money in a certain town, and that doesn't apply somewhere else. You could say that about a particular neighborhood in Chicago. So it's a very murky concept. It's one of those, I know it when I see it type of things, but because there isn't like, you can't define it easily, it's difficult to sort of delve into. How do you define lower class? I mean, how do you define upper class when we know that there's a 1%, but that 1%, there's another whole layer underneath it, and the percents don't tell the story either.
But Chicago is such a racially segregated city that that if you count the poor people, the vast majority of them are Black and Latino, and that in that way. We're talking about the same thing when we talk about race and class.
It's true that race is often a proxy for that.
It's pretty closely related in this city.
It's very, very closely related. But what I would say is that it's very clear whether you are white or Black or Hispanic or East Asian, but it's not clear always and across all kinds of different life experiences, what socioeconomic class you're in. And because people travel through socioeconomic classes, it's very difficult to make, to make generalizations about that. So I think it's a very important topic. It's very difficult to get right.
And there's one thing that Karen Lewis has talked a lot about when she talks about the schools, is that nobody is talking about poverty when it comes to the schools and why the children are succeeding or not succeeding, and how that plays such a role in success. The other thing is, politically, what I've seen is that we've gone from the war on poverty under LBJ to under Barack Obama, it's the middle class. Nobody talks about the poor at all. They've gotten completely away from that, talking about poverty or poor. And we're looking at, yes, we're supposed to be doing better, but there are a lot of middle class people who from 2008 became poor people. And they needed somebody to talk about what was happening to them. And we skipped over that altogether. So there's not enough emphasis placed on income levels and disparities. And we have simplified it to the 1% versus the 99%. And if it's effective, then fine. Maybe it'll get addressed after this election. Because clearly, what is happening in our neighborhoods is a crime, because there is no attention being paid to our neighborhoods whatsoever.
And I would argue that I think that class is one of the, and economics is one of the, economic difference is one of the major themes of this campaign. And I think both candidates are talking about it, although that's veiled somewhat as well. And, you know, Jesus Garcia talking about the neighborhoods, sure, but he's also, that's another way of saying, I'm not the rich guy from Wilmette. And Rahm Emanuel having to combat this impression that he is just a wealthy guy governing for the wealthy. The only people who ever get his ear are investment bankers and hedge fund guys and that sort of thing. So I think that you're going to hear that rhetoric throughout the race. And there's a question that came up here: why do we look at the money before the candidates' qualifications? I think I'll just throw it out there. We're running out of time, but it's tied in very closely with this. Who is funding you? Who is backing your agenda? And so I think that we do write campaign finance stories, and that's very closely tied to questions about class and how that resonates out there. Anyone have a Twitter version wrap-up comment or thought? Not a thing. No one's tweeting anymore. Okay.
I'll say one thing. We need diversity in the media at all levels. And it's not one. It's not a token. It's not one of this and one of that and one of this and one of that. You need full flavor, you need full disclosure, and you need diversity in these newsrooms, and it does not exist.
All right, good spot to end. Turning over to Reverend Landry there.
As we close, we want to ask each of the panelists to individually share your preferred email address for our guests in Can TV to keep the conversation going, because as you would guess, the next 6 weeks in this contest is going to be riveting, to say the least. So if each of the panelists could share their preferred email address or Twitter handle, it would be greatly appreciated.
Mark Brown at suntimes.com.
DL Cobb at thepublicityworks.net.
H. Hartman at Indigo, NDIGO.com.
Tweet me at Esther J. Cepeda.
Tweet me at CThomasABC7.
Once again, we'd like to thank our hosts, Columbia College, and on behalf of the Chicago Headline Club and Positive Vision Communications, thank you as our audience. Thank you very much for your energy and enthusiasm. And again, remember to reach out to our panelists and keep the conversation going. Thank you.
Thanks to the panelists.
Yes.